and I will start admitting all. So I'll monitor the lobby, Christos. And
Okay.
then, Henry, do you want me to pass to you first and you do a little preamble, or do you want me to go straight to Christos?
I'll do that.
Do a preamble, then we'll pass to Christos. Yeah, okay, so I'll start admitting all.
In everyone comes. It's now 10:31, as ever, we're late.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we have.
There you go. Good morning. Morning, William. Morning, David. Morning, Chris. Morning, Derek. Morning, Charles.
Morning.
Morning, Shay. Morning, Richard. Thanks for joining. Please mute if you can possibly to cut out any background noise for the presentation. That's very kind. Thank you. Chris, if you could mute as well, that'd be great. Thanks very much. Good to see everybody. All looking very well. Thank you very much. Morning, Natalia. Great to see you. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, everybody's muted. Hang on. Here we go. Another one coming in. Morning, Bob. If you could mute, please. Great to see you. If you could mute, please, Bob, that'd be great. Thanks very much. Excellent. Okay, let's just mute there. Good. Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We're delighted to have Christos with us today to run through the wonderful, very now opportunities and discussions relating to final salary surplus, DB surplus as we know it. So I'm going to pass you on to Henry first of all. But the house rules are obviously, if you'd like to ask any questions, please put them in the chat. You can raise a hand, but I know that Christos has got quite a few slides. So
I have nothing to say. Let us just move on.
We'll move on. Okay, we'll move on to Christos. Right. Okay. So we first of all, we are recording. William, Dragos, Derek, thumbs up, everybody, that we're recording. Brilliant. Okay. So I'll monitor the lobby, and without any further ado, I'll introduce Christos. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to make sure that I can share my screen. So everybody can see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, very good. Well, Henry and Steve, thank you very much for organizing this space and giving me the opportunity to present the ideas that we will be discussing this morning. Good morning to everyone. My name is Christos Christou, and after 30 years in the financial services, including in private equity, I became interested in pensions in light of the renewed emphasis on private assets following the Mansion House Accord, and earlier this year I qualified as a professional trustee. This morning I want to talk to you about a policy proposal that concerns the utilization of surplus within the perimeter of DB schemes as a complementary lever to the government's own DB surplus extraction framework. And in simple terms, the proposal is to increase the employer-related investment limit from 5% to 10% for those DB schemes that are in surplus on a low dependency basis. So let's start. This is the agenda of what I propose to cover: policy context, the mobilization idea, the safeguards and needs implementation, the types of delivery and instruments, the role of trustees, and some mini case studies, and then some questions that I have discussed with people as I have had conversations about this topic. So the policy context, first of all, I will not go into the details, as I'm sure you're all familiar with it by now. So I would just like to note some highlights from DWP's own impact assessment of this policy, and also examine briefly what it will mean for trustees. So essentially, based on DWP's numbers and assumptions, the extraction framework is anticipated to come into effect in 2027. At the earliest, will require new TPR guidance to trustees, and over the course of 10 years, it is expected that it will involve about 11.2 billion of extracted surplus, which after 25% tax will leave 8.4 billion of extracted surplus to be shared between sponsoring employers of productive finance and scheme members, as decided by the trustees of the affected schemes. DWP's own assumption is that this amount will be shared equally between productive finance and members. It is worth noting that extraction leads to permanent diminution in scheme assets, and step-ups can lead to permanent increase in future liabilities. This is not to say that I'm against extraction or discretionary step-ups. as we all know, there are about 4,000 DB schemes, and there are probably 10,000 roads that they can follow. And ultimately, it will be the trustees that decide what is appropriate for each scheme. Now, in terms of the questions that the trustees will be expected to address under the DB surplus scheme, the first one is, what is the surplus? The second one would be when to extract surplus, how much to extract, how to divvy up the extracted surplus between sponsoring employer and members, and what happens to the funding position going forward after the extraction. And the question is, what if in addition to extraction, surplus could also be mobilized within the perimeter? And here comes the policy proposal. Essentially, it is to, as I said, to raise the cap on sponsoring employer securities from 5% to 10% for schemes that are in surplus on low dependency basis, and the ERI limit for schemes that are not in surplus to stay at the 5%. I propose this on a low dependency basis because it is a prudential funding test that the regulator already expects schemes to meet. It is the most conservative and least gameable and most operationally simple basis. In short, if you're not securely funded on low dependency, you shouldn't be allocating to productive finance. In addition, I propose that this incremental headroom for exposures to an employer be accessible only via issuance of new securities, so funds would flow directly into productive finance, supporting the business of the sponsoring employer, but without any automatic allocation. In other words, create a lever that can be used by trustees exercising their fiduciary duties and control. Based on, in terms of numbers, based on DWP's own impact assessment, we know that there are about 3,620 DB schemes as of September 24, which were considered to be in surplus on a low dependency basis. And these schemes had around 1 trillion of assets. So a 5% increment in employer-related investment creates a potential headroom of about 50 billion that could be channeled in this way into productive finance within the scheme perimeters without tax leakage and with the implicit discipline on sponsoring employers to use the funds productively and not to pay dividends because they will be paying some money, there will be some cost associated with issuing the securities. Now, I use the word complementary advisedly because these figures that you see here is based on TPR's numbers and essentially tries to see the distribution of schemes according to the level of funding that they have on a low dependency basis. And as you can see, there is a very large number of schemes right at the extreme right that has got very healthy surpluses indeed, over 140% on a low dependency basis. So for schemes with very large surpluses like that, extraction may well be the best route. But I would expect that trustees will not simply go down the extraction route simply because they're over 100%, that there will be another threshold that they will want to see before they begin the conversation, and that they will want to remain above 100% after the extraction. And so if we consider that for the purposes of this discussion, that 120% is the ratio at which the conversation begins, whether we have extraction or not, and 110% is the level at which the trustees will want their scheme to remain after the extraction, then we can see that there is 3 zones, if you will, and the schemes that will come into extraction universe are the ones that are to the right of the 120% threshold, and that is about 40% of all schemes. The mobilization on the other side, if we consider that 110% is where the trustees want to remain after extraction, that becomes potentially the threshold at which mobilization can be considered. And so then that brings another 25% of schemes into the universe of schemes that can use surplus for productive finance purposes. And so the color coding that you see here is where is solid blue is likely that there will be mainly mobilization, whereas solid red is mainly extraction, and whereas purple is both options may well be very viable, and it will be up to the trustees to decide. Now, that the fact that the universe expands also means that the take-up and utilization rate assumptions for this policy probably can be a little bit higher than the mobilization, than the take-up and utilization rates that are used in the assumptions of the DWP's impact assessment.
Sorry, can you just explain what that red bar is on the very far right?
Yeah,
I'm getting confused there. It looks like LGPS to me, but no, of course it isn't, because there are about 800 of them. What is it?
This is the number of schemes that have got surpluses that on a low dependency basis are over 140%. So basically, on the horizontal axis is the level of funding, and on the vertical axis is the number of schemes, and this is based on TPR's. This is on TPR's data. So basically, we have a large number of schemes, it appears, that have got very large surpluses. We don't know how big these schemes are. At least the information that I have cannot inform that, cannot answer that question, but there are a large number of them. And then you have cumulatively large numbers of schemes that are between 120 and 140%, and you have between 110 and 120. So the numbers, I'll read them out to you. 2,677 schemes are above 110%. 1,936 schemes are over 120%, and about 922 schemes are about 140%.
Wow, many is that. Thank you very much for that. And LGPS announced they were 147% last week, and they're at 400 billion. Rather does give you an idea of just how much is heavily in surplus at the moment. Okay.
Indeed. Now the proposal is I can imagine that what you will feel that the 5% that was set up was there for a reason, and indeed I totally agree that a limit to such exposures is absolutely necessary. But could this 5% be too conservative, perhaps? Having researched which countries have ERI limits in place, I found that actually the US introduced an ERI limit for its DB schemes in 1974 as part of the ERISA legislation. And they've had this 10% in place since 1994, and they have had no particular systemic issues. And as of 2025, there are still, even though there has been a very large shift towards DC schemes, and of course they have the 401ks that have expanded tremendously, there are still 46,500 private sector DB schemes in the US with about 3 trillion of assets and 11 million members. And the 100 largest schemes controlling over $1 trillion of assets. So this is a proposal that leverages that experience to say, if 10% works in the US for 50 years, then perhaps for all the DB schemes that they have over there, perhaps it can work for the well-funded DB schemes in the UK as well. Now, the benefits that accrue from this kind of proposal is that from the government perspective, it accelerates the Mansion House goals in a tax-neutral way. And the employers get access to patient capital for investment purposes also, again, on a tax-neutral basis. From the members' perspective, the assets remain in the scheme, and therefore potentially, and also the covenant may become stronger because of investment in the business of the sponsor. And from the trustee standpoint, they get another tool that they can use, and they can treat any such investment like any other investment, so they still retain their fiduciary control. In terms of the level of what can the mobilization approach deliver? If we take the 5% incremental headroom over the 1 trillion of assets, that gives us 50 billion. That's a theoretical maximum. There are take-up and utilization assumptions here using similar methodology to DWP's methodological approach. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using slightly higher percentages than what the DWP used in their own assessment for the extraction, because we're talking about a larger number of pension schemes that are involved. Essentially, essentially mobilization will depend, of course, on a number of factors, and it will become, again, the trustees that would decide whether it's appropriate or not. It will become a factor of the trustee risk appetite, of the sponsor's investment needs, and of course the covenant strength.
What we have is a Peter Cameron Brown asking, what about Enron? Do you want to give an answer to that question?
What about Enron, meaning that they had more than 10%? I
think I'd better hand over to Peter to go to they kind of lost their pension, my memory.
Yeah, that's right. There was such a scandal about all the pensioners of Enron losing their pension rights when the company went bust. Now, I think most of them were in 401ks, but I think the
the 401ks
answered Derek's answered a point, but I think what it did was it made everybody very cautious about employer-related investments in the USA. It sort of changed the attitude, was my feeling at the time.
Well, actually, the 401k still doesn't have any limit to how much you can invest to your own employer, despite the double jeopardy risk. So the 401ks still do not have this kind of limit, and in fact, it has been resisted very vigorously. So I think the Enron was more affected by the 401ks than the DB schemes. So
happy?
No, it's more the attitude that the fact that people, pension schemes lost confidence in employer-related investments was the point I was trying to make.
Well, I think it's timely because we're turning to what are the governance safeguards of this, and this is something that, again, it's only schemes in surplus on a low dependency basis, so there's no automatic allocation, and the trustees are in control. So the trustees, do not have to use the headroom. Simply, there will be an opportunity for them if they believe that it was the right thing to do for the circumstances of their scheme. So, creating a headroom doesn't mean that you have to use it. What I'm proposing is that the headroom can be created and the trustees will remain in control. The assets do remain within the trust, so there's no depletion from that standpoint. The pricing of securities can be either at market if it involves also other parties, or it can be at arm's length with the support also of advisors to the trustees. And the member security can potentially be strengthened because the covenant, could be improved as money flows into the business of the sponsor. In terms of the implementation, it requires a minor tweak. It's Section 40 of the Pensions Act of 1995. Essentially, two main changes. One is to allow the schemes in surplus on a low dependency basis for the limit to increase from 5 to 10%, and then the trustees to have the power to invest in employer securities in circumstances of surplus on a low dependency basis. So, this is a very simple tweak, it has very simple implementation, and it requires no new TPR framework or guidance because essentially the ones already existing affecting all other investments can be used for this as well.
Christos, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Quick question from, a favor. Could you click the hide button where it says stop sharing at the bottom of your screen? Because it's sort of taking out some of the slides. You've just clicked hide on that. That's great.
Sorry.
And that's fine. And Con, you got your hand raised. You just want to ask a quick question, or do you want to wait till the end, Con? What do you want to do?
No, let me just offer some clarification here. 5% that we did have a regime in this country, and I think it's still the regime in Europe, that you can invest 5% in your sponsor employer or 10% in the employer group. That was the case in this country for a while.
Well, the 5% is what is in the legislation, as I understand it.
That's what we've got now.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I think it was 5% in any one entity, and 10% in the group, employer group.
Well, I mean, what I'm describing now is 10% to going back to that 10% wider group, if you will, because as you will see further, I'm recognizing that the investment could flow at different parts of the.
Christos, the point I'm just making is we've been there before. The world didn't come crashing down around our ears.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay.
So the putting the two frameworks next to each other, the extraction basically can deliver something by 2027 at the earliest. Mobilization can deliver something in 2026. DWP's impact assessment suggests 11.2 billion, of which 2.8 goes to tax. On the other side, even on the base case, there's of course zero tax, and about 20 billion can be mobilized for productive finance. So this is a policy lever that, in my view, deserves to be considered. And looking at how it could potentially be used in terms of productive finance uses, nothing on this slide will be a surprise to any of you. It involves business expansion, productivity improvements, innovation, resilience, and regulatory capex. In terms of the range of financing instruments that could be used, similarly, I'm sure there's no major surprises here. It could be ordinary equity, it could be different types of hybrid instruments, it could even be secured private debt. And again, in terms of where the issuers would be, who would be the obligors, it could be a topco holding company, it could be a subsidiary, it could even be a special purpose company. And these are instruments that the trustees already understand. So I don't anticipate that there will be major difficulty in being able to utilize this lever. So the end result would be that trustees and sponsors would essentially negotiate and match potential instruments to potential productive uses. The criteria for matching such instruments, of course, would be, as any other investment, return versus risk, liquidity, security, covenant impact, ESG fit, and diversification. And this would have to be, the trustees would have to use their own skills, the skills of their advisors, to come to a considered view as to whether to mobilize in this way and in what way to mobilize. Now, I will have some illustrative mini case studies to follow just to demonstrate how this could be used. There are some questions that trustees will probably need to will be asking in the context of surplus mobilization. How will such securities be priced? What will be the extra monitoring that may be required? Do we have the skill set for this? In terms of pricing, as I mentioned already, it can be at market pricing, particularly if there are other parties involved and the scheme is participating in an offering of some kind that involves others as well. Or it can be an arm's length negotiation if it is a completely private deal, so that sweetheart deals can be avoided and that the trustees cannot be browbeaten on price. The trustees can always draw on the advice of external advisors with skills if they need such skills that they don't have. And the monitoring will take place in a similar way that is taking already now, in that there are regular sponsor covenant reviews already in place. The securities monitoring will probably be handled by the same advisors if need be. Now, from the theoretical to the practical, in the interest of time, I propose to go through just one of these, but in the presentation I have a few more. So let's go to a warehouse expansion. It's probably fairly straightforward. The use of funds is a new regional distribution warehouse. The likely instrument for this is going to be a private loan note from the scheme, as it concerns a discrete asset, and security can be obtained directly on the asset. And to just put some numbers, a new regional warehouse will, in this day and age, is about £80 million for an average such warehouse. And let's assume that we have a scheme of 500 million of assets funded at 115% on a low dependency basis, which implies about 435 in liabilities. The existing employer-related investment is already at 1%, so that's 5 million, and the headroom going to 10%, the ERI could increase by 45. The trustees decide that they should stay at least at 105% on LDB after extraction, so willing to allow extraction of 44 million, or they willing to consider mobilization and increase the ERI to 9%. They don't want to go all the way to 10, which would mean an incremental exposure of 40 million. Under extraction, 40 million will become 33 after tax. Trustees will need to negotiate how much to release as a windfall to the sponsor. And even if the members get nothing, the 33 represents about 41 of capex. The sponsor still needs to fund 47, and the funding drops to 105%. Under mobilization, 40 million can be provided as a secure private loan note, priced according to the sponsor's creditworthiness, and sponsor only needs to fund 40 million from its own resources. The funding stays at 115%. So given this choice, if I were a trustee, I'd probably lean towards the mobilization, but every trustee in a different scheme may have a different view. So I'll go past these ones and just turn to some trustee questions. Does the increase of the ERI limit create extra over-concentration? I think we've addressed this already, that the 50 years experience with a 10% limit suggests that it is sufficiently prudent. And in practice, I would say that the schemes are already well below 5%. So mobilization is not likely to take us from 5 to 10, but probably more from 2 or 3% to 7 or 8% by prudent trustees. Does the increase in the ERI limit to 10% increase double jeopardy risk? I would argue that it does the opposite, because the eligibility, first of all, is conditioned on LDB surplus. So we're only talking about schemes that have got already well funded and have less reliance on the sponsor anyway. The funding ratio is protected, and the sponsor's improved access to capital can actually strengthen the covenant, so reducing the double jeopardy risk. Would this create a moral hazard? No, because the sponsors, the idea of moral hazard would be that the sponsors might take excessive risks, that, they would lobby to get access to scheme funds because it is something that is available to them. But in fact, they would be paying a price under this route, because they actually, issuing new securities. And the mobilization eligibility is binary. So it's defined by surplus, which on an LDB basis cannot be gained by the sponsor. And the trustees still remain the fiduciaries making the investment decisions on risk return grounds, not on the sponsor convenience. Will employers pressure trustees? Well, employers may seek to influence allocation decisions, like they try to influence all kinds of decisions, but with no automatic allocation and with the existing duties and powers that the trustees have, they still have full control, same as with any other investment decision. Would this increase the complexity? We already addressed that. Would it need new skills? We've already addressed that. What happens if the sponsor fails after mobilization? Well, limiting the ERI increase to schemes in surplus reduces the implications from sponsor failure, because we're talking about schemes that are already well funded in that sense, and we're not reducing the funding ratio. And the PPF still remains as a backstop. The monitoring and the pricing actually could act as early warning, because we would be monitoring one extra element in the whole process. Now, on a wider policy implementation, why not just extract surplus? I'm not saying we shouldn't. The extraction remains an option. Mobilization puts surplus to work before tax. Extraction deals with the distribution of how to use the surplus after tax, but both are valid options. And as we saw in the earlier diagram, for some schemes that have got very high surpluses, the extraction may well be the optimal option. What about step-ups or one-off member distributions? Again, they do remain available as options, and again, they can be very relevant and very appropriate options for certain schemes. Does this open the door for political misuse? In my view, no, because again, it's the trustees that decide these matters. The government is not directing the allocation to ERI, is simply giving the opportunity to trustees, if they think it's a good idea, to use that extra headroom. Now, there are some wider policy questions that I don't have answers to, but I think are interesting in the context of what we are discussing. Is there a link between relative UK equities undervaluation relative to the US equities and the historical endgame focus on buy-ins and buyouts? with the corresponding emphasis on fixed income securities and the disinvestment from UK equities. What can the trustees do to ensure the surplus released to a sponsor is not used to fund shareholder dividends? At the moment, I don't think there is very much that they can do other than at the beginning of the negotiation with them. But once the money goes into a corporate treasurer's coffers, what they do with it is going to be up to the company. How likely are the trustees to go gung-ho with extraction, given historical experiences with deficits? I suspect not very gung-ho. How long will surpluses last? And how substantial are they likely to be if and when interest rates begin to fall? Again, I think trustees that have lived through different cycles, will be understandably cautious. And how will the members, how will members of schemes and their unions feel about surplus extraction if members get no share of it? That is another dimension that will have to be considered. So I finish this presentation with a call to collaboration. I'm talking about a two-line legislative change, essentially, a 20 to 30 billion opportunity and zero tax leakage. If you feel like I do that this is something that is worth discussing more widely, then please reach out to me. Let's engage to see if we can get a DWP, TPR and industry roundtable convened and include this amendment. The objective really is to give trustees an additional lever and to help meet the productive finance challenge. So thank you so much.
Well, that was rather good. Thank you very much indeed. And, I saw all those slides that came through to me and I thought we're never going to get through so much material in such a short period of time. And you actually polished them off and kept us all with you. So thank you very much indeed. Have we got any questions?
Time to stop sharing here, and I don't know how to.
How do you stop sharing? I think there was a sharing button somewhere on Teams.
Ah, yeah, found it. Okay, found it.
Good man that you are.
Okay.
I mean, to me, the big question is to do with the behaviour of employers and to what extent they go about using this money to get productive growth, which has long-term value, and to what extent they simply suck the money out and send it off to wherever the shareholder is or are. And I think that there has to be a proper discussion. Now, you were putting forward a discussion between the DWP and other parties, and that strikes me as being a sensible enough way of going about things. Has anyone got any thoughts about that?
Henry, can I just say that I share the concern that extracted surplus that goes to a sponsor can be used in multiple different ways, and some of them will be positive for the covenant and some of them will not be. If they pay down debt, that will be obviously a positive for the covenant. If they put money into new activity and that activity improves their business, that also will improve the covenant and the member security. On the other hand, they could pay dividends. The fundamental difference between the extraction and the mobilization approach is that with extraction, there is absolutely no cost to the employer. They get the money, they do what they feel is appropriate with it. With mobilization, because they're issuing securities, they are paying for the use of money. So whether it's equity, they will cause dilution to their shareholders. If it's debt, they'll pay an interest expense. So that creates a discipline, which in my view, an employer will not simply take the money, pay a cost, and then not put it to something that will at least generate enough to pay that cost. So this approach, in my view, creates that extra discipline that the money that is mobilized in this way will more likely go to productive use rather than not.
Well, I'll hand this over to John Quinlivan, who has a question to ask. John.
Hi, Christos. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, a couple of thoughts or points. We've spoken to many of the very large pension funds, and one thing that really does jump out is that they tend not to hold anything directly. They hold everything through agents and so on. And so the question of skill set isn't just about knowledge. It's about process and capability. And I question, for one, whether holding, whether it's private equity, private debt in the sponsor, is something that, in anything, is something that most trustees can get their arms around. That's the first thing. And I'm not. It's not to say that the productive capital piece in terms of usage is critical, because you've asked the question, what can trustees do to ensure that this happens? If there's any onus put on them to ensure that, then that's going to be a barrier. And I guess the last one, you said no leakage. In terms of bad actors, I question whether there will be tax leakage and what the Treasury will think, or they will suspect tax leakage, which is why the 5% limit came in the first place, because of what allegedly Lord Hanson was up to.
Thank you, John. You got Charles, you got Christos, you got any response to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in relation to the productive use, as I said, in my view, the trustees can only influence how the money is going to be used at the time of extraction, but once it is extracted, there is not a lot that they can do. But with this mobilization approach, I come back to the fact that the sponsor has to pay a price for it. And if they're paying X%, they're not going to simply park it somewhere and pay the X%. They will only use it if they can generate X plus. And that, in my mind, is the safeguard that these can be used for productive uses rather than for other purposes. In terms of the tax leakage, I'm not familiar with what Lord Hanson was up to, but what I'm talking about is that in comparison with extraction, at the time when the assets are being extracted, the Treasury gets 25%. There's no such 25% tax cost for using the assets within the perimeter. So in that sense, I say that there is no tax leakage. And in terms of the trustee skill set, I mean, the trustees are being encouraged to consider private assets. Private assets, suggest to me that either they will have to beef up their own skill sets, or they will have to make sure that their advisors are able to help them in relation to private assets. And in that context, I would submit that, they will already have, or they will build skill sets that will deal with private assets of third parties, and therefore, why wouldn't they be able to deal with an incremental exposure that they already have in some cases in relation to their sponsoring employer? If there was no exposure to employers right now, I would agree with you that this is completely new. But the limit is there. If the limit is there, to whatever degree it is being used, it means that somebody actually has the skill set to use 1% out of the 5, or 2% out of the 5, or 3% out of the 5. All I'm saying is that instead of 3, they could go to 8, or they could go to 6.
I understand that the process piece is important, Christos, which is that they're holding private debt through vehicles, and therefore for the sponsor to get an investment in private debt into the business, that then has to go through a vehicle, so that the sponsor has to engage with an appropriate wrapper solution agent, and that creates a significant complication and hurdle, frankly.
I disagree with you on this one, and I disagree with you for the purpose of for the following reason. Why is it that every time there is a private asset, it has to be through an agent and a vehicle and all of this? You're describing something that to me suggests that that is the only way that it can be done. I don't feel that that's the only way that it can be done. And we have seen pension funds that are able to do direct investments and do it very well. And we're talking about relatively small percentage exposures. So we're not talking about the trustees doing something on a private basis along the whole universe. We're talking about the sponsor that they deal with and they understand and they follow, because they do the sponsor covenant reviews. I mean, if there is one company that the trustees understand, this is the one that they understand.
I'm not disagreeing with that. So this isn't an opinion. This is based on my experience.
I've got a number of questions coming up.
Yes.
I'm going to sort of move on to Charles. If you want to come back to this, Christos, please do.
Yeah.
But Charles, you covered it from a small scheme and small employer point of view, or relatively small.
Yeah.
Do you want to put
absolutely.
your point? Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Christos. Very interesting. The point I'd make from a sponsor's point of view is, okay, it's all a very noble project. I wish it the best, but for me, if I want to invest, I can get money at 4% interest from the bank. Whereas if I were to take it, say, from a surplus, I imagine I would be obliged to pay a level of yield equivalent to that which the scheme is already enjoying, being 70% in equities. So, I think, they should lower the bar a bit further, frankly, in terms of eligibility. I think that if they really want to see money flowing into sponsors' investments and what have we, why tax us 25% on money that we pumped in and has grown? If they really were serious about reinvigorating the sponsors, why hit them with the 25% tax? I know it's gone down from 35, but I still think it's punitive and yet another barrier. So, I'd love to see this process happening, but the barriers to me as a sponsor, and I represented a group of sponsors, SMEs, it just looks like it's not lacing the cost-benefit analysis in the right direction. Or perhaps I've just overlooked something massive.
Well, I think the 25%, that you raised, there's a tax leakage, is one that indeed concerns me as well, in that it will become a factor in the deliberations of both trustees and sponsors as to whether to use the extraction route, because 25% is still. Sorry?
I completely agree.
Right. Now, the proposal that I'm putting forward is, if you will, a complementary lever. I'm not saying that the DB extraction route, not be followed through, but I'm saying that there is a possibility of having a complementary lever, which is mobilizing within the perimeter of the pension schemes. And by doing that, you don't have the tax leakage. You have zero tax for those new securities that a sponsor will issue. Now, you mentioned the 4% that they can go to the bank, and indeed, if they can get 4% and the cost of getting securities and getting money from the pension scheme is higher, then they wouldn't use that. But there could be hybrid instruments, for example, that could be attractive to both sides. That could be convertible debt. There could be preference shares. There can be a number of different instruments that can be available from the pension scheme that might not be available from other sources, or not be available, to the level that they needed at the time they needed. So this approach simply gives more options to both trustees that are there to protect the members of the interest of the members, and the sponsors on the other side. It does take, in a way, the government out of the equation. So in that sense, you don't have to worry about the government taking its share of 25%.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Are we happy to move on? Because I've got other questions lined up. The first from William McGrath. Okay, William, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I thought that was terrific, and I think it's a whole area of opportunity which hasn't really been explored properly, because I think, as John and Connor both referenced, it's sort of fallen out of favour, really, that sort of self-investment. But I think if the government really want to see long-term investment in productive assets, they've got to start providing a few incentives to do it. And I think this could really be one of them, particularly if it's seen as part of a package of proposals in which there's more money being invested in a neat kind of way. And I think the 25% tax is a problem. So here's a mechanism really where companies can avoid it. Maybe they can sort of share some of that benefit with perhaps they don't need such a high yield on the investments. Perhaps they can invest at zero coupon bonds and this sort of stuff that actually has a major productive benefit. So I think this is a whole undiscovered, unexamined area where, because there are surpluses and you want to give a long-term time frame, this is something which the government certainly should put on their agenda.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I'm going to move on. We've got a lot of questions to get through. Bob Compton, I missed you out. I'm so sorry. To you.
Okay, Christos, and thank you, Henry. William just said much of what I was going to say, but I've had the benefit of talking with Christos and seeing some of the slides he's prepared about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And on second reading, what I want to say to Christos, this is a fabulous idea, which is why I suggested to Henry and to William that they should speak with you directly. It's an additional option, and I think people who are asking questions and saying it's not a good idea or whatever, it is an option. It doesn't have to happen, and it does save tax at 25% on surplus going back to companies. There's no control on surplus going back to companies where the trustees have paid or the companies have paid the 25% tax. That's money lost to the pension scheme, lost to the principal employer. It's money which will not be used for the benefit of the covenant of the sponsor or for the members of the pension scheme. There's only one potential drawback from this excellent idea, and that is that the government are looking to raise tax. And Rachel Reeves was on the television this morning saying that times are hard. It's setting us up for budget increases in at the end of November. This creates an opportunity for getting GDP starting to grow slowly, but it will provide investment in the UK, because there are UK pension schemes, and if the money is being done in various contracts or whatever, it's a great idea. And what I found very, very interesting, Christos, is that in this pensions playpen group, everybody, the majority of people in it are involved in running or managing or being trustees of pension schemes in one way or another. Your thought process is coming from outside the box with newer, fresh ideas, and your ability to look how equity can be generated, how companies can be financed to do new stuff. It's a breath of fresh air fundamentally. So thank you very much, Christos, for going through this for the second time. So thank you. That's all I want to say, Henry.
Thank you.
Cheers. You just take that. I'm going to move on, if I may, to a question we have from, where's my number 2 gone?
It's me.
Is it?
Well, I'm number 1 now.
All right.
It's Bryn. It's Bryn.
All right, indeed. It is indeed. Our noble lords. Yes.
Thank you, Christos. Yeah, for some interesting thoughts. Just on the tax issue, it's simple. You get the money goes in tax-free. When it comes out, is tax. That's just the deal as it is. The idea that people should take money, untaxed money out of a pension fund and it not be taxed, just misunderstands what the whole deal is about. Now, I've been here before. I don't know. I expect one as well as here to have been before when we had surpluses in the past. And that's just that Christos does look at the Hanson case and that whole history, because I'm sure the Inland Revenue haven't forgotten. I'm in favour of deals. I think there's always a deal to be done if a scheme has got whatever we mean by surplus. I'm strongly of the view, and I'll do what I can to ensure that in any deal, the members get some material advantage. It's just second nature to me. But in terms of deals, previous experience says that employers look for simple solutions, and I agree with Peter that the simple solution here is to use the money to pay the cost of accruing benefits. It's simple, straightforward. You can do it, and it's sort of virtually regulation free. What the government wants to do now apparently is to enable some of that money to be used to cover the cost of DC benefits from the same principal employer. But I'm not quite sure where that's going, but that's so employers do look for simple solutions. And that brings me to my question, really, which is all this could be done already. There are schemes that could make refunds of surplus. There are schemes where the employer limit on investments provided enough scope to do this sort of deal. Admittedly smaller than Christos is suggesting, but it could be done. Are there good examples of where this has been done in practice? Because it could have been done. Although Christos says these changes are needed in the law, it could be done under the existing law, as I understand it. So let's have some examples.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, in terms of, you know, to what degree the ERI is currently fully utilized, I cannot tell you whether it's, you know, in aggregate, a 2% exposure relative to the 5% limit or a 3% exposure relative to the 5% limit. I fully expect it to be well below the 5%. And that's part of why I'm calling for this kind of engagement with DWP and TPR, because they will have that information in terms of what is the take-up of employer-related investments as things stand at the moment. Are we at 0%? Are we at 5%? Where are we in between? And if we are going to give an extra headroom, what is the historical experience that we can build on going forward? So I think from that standpoint, you know, I welcome the question, and I think it speaks to the need for some further discussion with interested parties and actually have more information that I can bring to bear on this. At the same time, I would say that we do have historically for the last 20 years, the emphasis has been on endgame and buyouts and buy-ins. And before that, there had been deficits. And so for a very long time, even if these levers were available, nobody would be looking at them seriously because there were no surpluses to be discussed or how to use them. You know, we are facing something which may last or may not last very long, but we are in a position now where a lot of schemes have got surpluses. And I think it's legitimate that there is a debate and the government is moving in the direction of finding ways to utilize these surpluses in a productive way. And I agree with everything that you have mentioned in terms of, from the trustee standpoint, that you always want to make sure that you improve the member's position. And in any deal that you engage in negotiations for, you know, with sponsors, you know, you try and do that. So I think, you know, two parts to my answer, if you will. One, yes, you're right to ask for more debate on this and more information on this. Secondly, I think it is topical now and it hasn't been in the past. And so I would not be surprised if there are not a lot of examples going back, because for the last 20 years, the emphasis has been somewhere else.
I hope we can move on because we've got 3 more questions I want to get to. Is that okay, my noble lord? Yeah. Peter. Oh, sorry, no, Rosalind, do excuse me. You are number 1.
I was going to get her. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it'd be quite helpful to mention the fact that, I mean, you know, like a lot of other people, I think it's a great idea to look at things like this, and it is very sensible. What I'm finding is, because there are ways, and have been for some years, ways for people to look at employer investment which doesn't fall foul of the 5%. It's a bit complicated and usually involves an SLP structure. I am aware that over the last few years, a number of schemes have started looking at this because they have a surplus. So I think we are beginning to see things like this. It would be an awful lot easier if the 5% was 10%, and then people would do it using the scheme investment, I think, a lot more comfortably. What I have found in terms of the questions that trustees ask around investment is that they fall into 3 categories. The first is that there's inevitably a single concentration risk, which pension schemes do tend to like to be very diverse. And I don't think we need to just change this bit of law. We may need to change some of the law around investment rules as well. Some of the specific legislation about what trustees have to do, which may cause a few challenges here. I don't mean it's insurmountable, but if you really want to encourage it, it's a good idea to look at that as well. The second thing people look at is the risk of concentration with the employer specifically, because even a low dependency or even a buyout funded scheme is in a place that unless they're fully secured on a buy-in, they are running the risk of the employer getting into trouble. So having an investment in the employer is a second part of the same risk from their point of view. So again, trustees do tend to be a bit uncomfortable about that. And my experience is you have to offer them a much better than usual rate of return for them to be comfortable with it. And thirdly, just fundamentally, trustees and a lot of schemes now are looking for increasingly liquid assets because they're in a net paying out rather than paying in position, and therefore they are nervous about assets which are that there is fundamentally a problem with defined benefit pension schemes and patient capital, because patient capital by its very nature tends not to want to pay out for a time, which is great if you've got a long-term bit of investment there, but defined benefit pension schemes are increasingly old, and so they are not looking for 30-year investments. They're looking for something they're going to get paid out regularly over the next few years. So that's where some of the challenges are. That is not me saying you can't do it or that people won't be interested, but the thing you're competing against as an investment opportunity is things that really require you to be offering something better, usually in terms of return and often in terms of external security, so that the trustees can get over some of these worries. So my experience is where trustees have been looking at this, those are the questions they're asking. Maybe we need to look at the legislation about how pension trustees should be looking at investment if we want to stop them doing that. Anyway, that was my only thought.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get the other two questions out and then allow you the chance to wrap up with answers, Christos. I think we want from Peter.
Right. Yes. Thank you very much. In fact, we've just covered a lot of the points that I was going to raise. That Rosalind's covered them very clearly. I think I'm very sceptical about it, and I think you're going to have to change an awful lot of other legislation rather than just that limit, because the trustees have to have written advice from an independent expert to make any investment. So they're not in a particularly favoured position for towards the employer. Secondly, as I'm sure Rosalind will tell us, there's this risk of trustees being sent to prison for recklessly investing the pension scheme funds. While you're talking about surplus funds here, that the legislation doesn't make that distinction. And thirdly, and the point about the long service employee, a lot of the existing employer-related investment is historic. It relates to, and typically it relates to properties occupied by the employer, which were set up as a separate property company, and the pension scheme had investment in those. So it's not.
I'm going to have to move you on to Con Keating now, if I may. Yeah. I'm sorry. Con, do you want to say your quick bit, then we wrap up?
Let Peter finish, Henry.
Oh, right. If you want, you sacrifice.
I had effectively finished. So I do think you have a wider task on the hand of to try and change attitudes across the whole of the pension industry before you'll see any likely take up of this in a significant manner.
Quick one, Con.
Let me just come in. I actually thought about doing this about 6 months ago. That is getting schemes to invest up to the 5% level. I spoke to 5 schemes. The only scheme which had any investment in its parent, in its sponsor, was a London listed company which owned some of its parent stock by virtue of the fact that it owned the FTSE All Share as an index fund. Not one of them wanted to invest in their sponsor. I think you're going to have a very hard time selling the concept to sponsors, Christos.
Thank you. Christos, do you want to finish up?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, you know, on the starting with the last one, the question of the sponsors. If I'm in the shoes of the sponsors and I have the opportunity to get money for free, I will do that every day of the week. And so extraction in that sense.
By definition, you're not going to get it for free. If you're getting it for free, it fails to be an investment.
No.
That's
no,
a clear breach
I'm
of
sorry.
fiduciary duty.
I'm sorry, Con. I'm talking about the sponsor now, who is sitting at an arm's length from the pension scheme, and there is 40 million that is going to be extracted, and there is a negotiation that is going to take place after the 10 million that is paid to the tax. What will happen to the 30? What cost does the sponsor face on the amount of money that he will get from the 30 million?
Well, he's going to be either paying, if it's structured as debt, he's going to be paying a commercial rate that he would otherwise have to pay on debt. If it's equity, he's going to be paying the cost of equity to him.
You're describing my policy proposal, which is the mobilization. I'm comparing it with the extraction, and I'm saying that the extraction from the standpoint of the sponsor, if you're talking to the sponsors, you mentioned that none of the sponsors wanted to have this, or you are describing the pension schemes, not the sponsors, because we make, you know, two different constituencies.
I was describing the pension schemes. I didn't talk to the sponsors.
Right.
Gents,
okay.
We are moving towards the end. In fact, we are past the end. So can we wrap up, please, rather than continue the conversation, which you can do elsewhere?
Okay. Well, I would like to thank all of you for you know, attending and listening to, you know, what I had to cover this morning, and for all the questions. And, you know, I'm welcoming further conversations along the lines of these questions that you have raised. And it's for this reason that I feel that indeed it needs to be a roundtable.
I agree.
Yeah, Christos, thank you. Somebody's asked, Shay would like to know, can we share the slides? Can you send us the slides, Christos? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah, I have them. They will be on my blog if you want to go on that.
Right. Yeah.
If you send Steve your address,
Well,
he will
yeah,
send it to you.
email me and I can send them to you as well, Shay, if that's all right. So
A very, very quick one. Is there any chance that the Playpen or Christos and other experts might put together a briefing paper for sponsors and trustees? Simply laying the groundwork for a round table.
Yeah, there is a short policy proposal paper and a one-pager. The one-pager, I think, was what was put in your emails inviting you to the talk this morning, and there is a shorter, you know, version of the, you know, sort of a memo version of, if you will, what we went through this morning in the presentation.
Brilliant. Grist to the mill. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
yeah, fantastic, excellent. Okay, well, thanks everybody today for joining. The video will be up and running in about an hour, and we hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Can we have your clapping thanks, virtual thanks, note of thanks to Christos for a great session? Thumbs up from Henry, thumbs up from everybody, lots of virtual clapping. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed today's session. If you would like the slides, please come back to me or Henry by email, or look at Henry's blog. But Christos, thank you very much for a great session. Really enjoyed that. And I think Playpen would support, you know, a round table. Absolutely, yeah. Let's keep talking. It's very important. So, so as usual, we have peace in the Middle East, we think, but let's place peace in the East as the next big thing. So yeah, let's pray for that as well. And hope we're not taken over by aliens by Christmas, according to some scientists. But there we go. Good to see everybody. Have a great week, and see you next time at the Playpen. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.